Thank you all so much for joining us today for this mini Intro to Hieroglyphs workshop that we're doing. My name is Calgary Haynes Troutman, and I am the Youth and Family Program Manager here at the Oriental Institute. I'm joining you from home today. Thank you so much for welcoming us into your homes via Zoom. So I'm also joined today by Catie Witt, who is a PhD candidate in Egyptology, and she is the one who's going to be leading the show today. I'm just here to help out, but she's going to show you all about hieroglyphs.
Thanks for joining us today, everyone. So we're just going to get started first before we dive into all of those awesome worksheets that you have hopefully nearby. We'll talk a little bit about just hieroglyphs in general and really the purpose of this workshop. Unfortunately, after 2 sessions together, we're not going to be able to completely be able to read everything in hieroglyphs. That takes years and years of practice. I know I'm doing it. And so we're doing a little bit, just kind of get a taste of what ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs are like. And talking about hieroglyphs more generally, I'm using the term, I think there's some confusion between hieroglyphics and hieroglyphs. And so when we're talking about a hieroglyphic writing system, we're talking about a system that uses, instead of like our alphabet, we use different little signs that stand in for either particular letters. They can stand in for different sounds. They can stand in for multiple sounds. What we have are called biliterals and triliterals. So you can have one sign that does the sh sound or a th sound or a ch sound. You have one sign for that. You can also have signs that stand in for a whole word. So you can have the ankh is probably the most popular thing. Has anybody seen an ankh before? It looks like a cross with a little loop at the top. That can stand all by itself and mean a whole word for life. So you have all these different uses, and then you can also have a sign that comes at the very end of the word that looks like, the most common one you'll see is like a seated person, and that's what we call a determinative, and that will kind of give you more information about a word. So,
all right, I think I see somebody has a question. Freeze here.
Yeah.
I can unmute you and you can ask your question. Go ahead.
It was, she said at the end of the sentence, I wasn't quite sure what she said, I didn't quite hear it. It was a what something?
Oh, it's called sometimes a determinative.
The determinative.
And so
Okay.
It's called that because it kind of determines the meaning of the word. It gives you more information about the meaning of a word. And so that's different from our writing system, right? Where we don't have those types of helpful clues that tell us that this is a word that has to do with a person, this is a word that has to do with water. A lot of times you'll get boats at the end of words, and that can tell you either it has something to do with a boat or it has something to do with water travel, which is really kind of fun.
Cool.
So hieroglyphs comes from the Greek term for sacred writing. So it's the idea that hieroglyphs, not only were they helpful for reading in ancient Egypt, they held significance and power. So the idea of images as being powerful. And so by writing in hieroglyphs, you were able to kind of make things happen. And they're used for magical texts, they're used in temple scenes, and they could bring the text to life. Hieroglyphs go back as early as 5,000 years ago. That's a really long time. And they're used up until the Roman period. So it was a long time they're using the same hieroglyphs. Sometimes you get more towards the Ptolemaic period. So a little bit later, when you get Greeks and Romans, you start to get new signs that develop. And those have to do with, you get foreign words come in, so you have to create new signs in order to try and explain those things. And you also have different types of writing systems that we'll talk more about on Thursday. We're not going to get into it today, but it's still the Egyptian language, but you'll see different writing styles that sometimes you'll find out today when writing your name out in hieroglyphs, how hard it is or how long it can take you sometimes to draw just one letter, to draw just one sign. And so after a while, they're just like, okay, this is taking too long. If we're going to really sit there and try and transcribe everything, we're going to have some sort of cursive system. And that's what develops a little bit later. You get what's called hieratic, and we'll talk about that more on Thursday. But for hieroglyphs today that we're going to be doing, we're just going to be focusing on the signs themselves and specifically how that matches our alphabet. And so we talked a little bit about, you'll get some biliterals, triliterals. I'm going to pull up the hieroglyphic alphabet sheet real quick before we jump into the exercises. I just want to show you. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's hope this works. So you can see that we have up here our alphabet listed at the top, and you'll see a little bit kind of what we said about the CH. You'll get different sounds that don't perfectly correspond to our alphabet. You get different types of sounds, and you'll also see that some letters are missing, because a lot of times when we're trying to use different languages, the sounds don't always match across languages. They'll use, but some sounds will sound very similar, so we can try and do that. One example is, and why we include at the bottom with the sounds, like the little sound icon next to the example of how it sounds. Like if you try and do, sometimes F can stand in for a V sound. And so if you try and say out loud to yourself, you do the, you're using the same part of your mouth. You're using the front of your mouth. And so a lot of times those sounds can be interchangeable in letters. So that's something to look out for when, and same thing like the X sound. You can have a KS, because we say X, but it'd be a X sound. And so you can write those two signs next to each other to achieve the same sound quality. Same thing with the J sound here. It's a J, which sometimes when we as Egyptologists are transcribing things or writing them out in our alphabet, we use a DJ sound, because to make sure that we're having a different sound quality than our regular G. So whereas we distinguish between G and J, the Egyptians would have too. You have a J versus a G sound.
Okay.
And so we make sure that we distinguish between those things. So we'll come back to this hieroglyphic alphabet, but let's go to our next document, which is the Intro to Hieroglyphs Part 1 document. I'm going to keep my screen shared here for a little bit so that we can see this. And I want you to follow along as best you can. If that means if you don't have the printed out sheets in front of you, you can have just pen and paper on the side. And something that's really fun about Egyptian hieroglyphs is that you can write them in a lot of different directions. The ancient Egyptians wrote them in all different directions for the most part. So they could write them left to right, they can write them right to left. The way that we always read hieroglyphs is, you'll see, I'll go back to the sheet. If you see like a bird or some sort of animal, what we do is we read into the face of the animal. That's how we know which direction that we're reading in hieroglyphs. But we can write in English letters or Arabic letters, all these different ways. So if you want to try practicing how hard it is to write either backwards or up and down, too, where you stack the letters on top of each other. Sometimes too, the ancient Egyptians will have specific orderings of things where they're grouped. And that's kind of in the second part here, where you'll have a grouping of signs that just fit together nicely. And it's the idea of, you want it to be intelligible, you want to have the letters in the correct order, but the ancient Egyptians also wanted to make it look pretty. They wanted to make it look nice and fit into the space that they had. A lot of times they were carving them on objects where you have a limited space. It's not just one long, sometimes you did have long papyrus sheets, but other times you had a confined space that they were trying to fit the text that they wanted to put on that object into that space. So that's why you have all these different directions that they could write hieroglyphs.
Catie, we had a question. What do the animal faces tell you when you're writing vertically?
That's a great question. And I think sometimes that is a challenge too. And that's when I think, for me personally, I rely a lot on grouping then. And that's something that you kind of practice over time. And it's getting the hang of those things, but it can be challenging sometimes. But for the most part, you're always reading into the face. And if you have, what can be helpful is sometimes you'll have two birds in a row. And then you know they're not facing different directions. They'll always be facing the same direction. And then you know, okay, I'm following the same line then. If I'm reading down and they're all facing the same direction.
Thank you. And then there's one more question that's kind of a follow-up, I think. Did the ancient Egyptians have rules about words could be broken, as in English syllables?
Yes. There are definitely specific rules and certain things that you see more often than other times. And that's where you'll get a lot of abbreviations too, sometimes with space. What we see a lot in hieroglyphs is that you may have the same word even in the same text, but it could be written two different ways. And you'll have, maybe my favorite example is the word ankh, is the word for life, which I wonder if I go down. No, I'm giving away. But well, I'll bring that up. I'll show that an example of that on Thursday, actually, because we'll see that in a couple objects on Thursday. But sometimes you can get any level of it being written out. You can either get a single sign, or you can get a couple signs plus the determinative. You can get all these different spelling variations that anyone reading it will still understand what they're talking about and be able to break them in the same way.
Awesome. All right, I have one more question, and then if we have other questions, we'll hold them till the end or answer them on Thursday. We'll have a little more time for questions on Thursday. So Tessa and Izzy were wondering, did they have punctuation in their writing in hieroglyphs?
That's a great question. I think not, for the most part. We don't really see punctuation in the same way that we use it in English. Sometimes you'll get spacing that can be helpful. You'll get spacing a little bit. Sometimes you'll get different, like maybe you'll get different red marks, different little ticks that kind of tell you more so in poetry. But for the most part, they don't use punctuation like we do. And so they rely, and we rely a lot when we're trying to read and interpret these texts on word order. So in sentence structure and knowing when a new sentence comes into place. One type of punctuation that can sometimes be helpful, depending on which time period, is you'll get a specific word that's an EU, and that will mark either the beginning of a new clause or beginning of a clause, whether it's a new clause or something that's related to the last one. depends on which time period. But let's try it out. So let's go to the My Name in Hieroglyphs sheet. So you're going to have either you can keep my screen up and then, or you can have, if you have this worksheet out next to you, you can do that too, but you want to have your alphabet also on hand. And try seeing if you can match these letters on the sheet to your hieroglyphic alphabet sheet. I'll give you a couple minutes to see if we can do that.
What's Y? A hand. I know. How am I supposed to do this?
Well, maybe I can help with that, but let's see. So let's try and do it together a little bit. So we've got this first middle line here. So we've got, using the same example as the top line. So this first letter here would correspond, we're going to write our letter I. So the reed leaf goes for I. And then the lion, coincidentally, starts with an L. So we have an L, I-L, S, A, B, T. And so now looking at that, you kind of got to sit back and then you got to say it to yourself out loud. And go, Elizabeth. What name does that sound like to us? Elizabeth, right?
Elizabeth.
Yeah, so then you just read the name Elizabeth. And it kind of works the same way. We'll try this then one at the bottom. Let's do here. We're going to do, this one sounds like a k sound. So we got Chris, and then the snake is a sound, an F sound, or a PH. It can also sound like a PH sound. So Christopher.
No, it was Christopher. I
Yeah. You guys got it.
Christopher. I know where are you guys. I was like, this looks like Christopher. And I'm like, Christopher. Then
Yeah.
still. It still
got
looks like
it.
Christopher.
So we can sound out things the same way that we would sound them out if you were learning a brand new word in English. You can also try and sound it out here. So let's look at the next sheet then and look about my name in hieroglyphs. So the first step, so that we can write our name in hieroglyphs, I want you to write out your name in the box. And we're going to kind of do the same thing that we did for the last one, where we kind of say it out loud so that we can really look at the signs. And we're going to try and match it to what we have on our alphabet sheet. So after you write your name out, you have to circle any vowels that sound like an E, an ah, or an oo. And then you can cross out any ones that kind of don't sound, or what are short sounds. It's hard to tell how far we are with being on the Zoom session, but we'll just talk about it a little bit. So once you've done that, once you've crossed out some of the short sounds and you're just keeping the E, ah, and oohs, you're going to write the remaining letters, the remaining part of your name, in the part 2 box. And that's what we're going to use to write our cartouche. And a cartouche is basically, it's a French term for this kind of rope, basically, that encircles the name of a king or royalty. So we're going to put our name today in a cartouche. So once you have finished crossing out letters, you can write your name in this cartouche here. Using your alphabet.
I think in the interest of time, you might not get to finish writing your name in hieroglyphs, but you can definitely finish afterwards because we want to make sure we can explain all of the other activities coming up too.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and keep moving forward, but we'll come back and talk more about cartouches on Thursday because they'll come up again when we're looking at some objects. So this is an activity, the next activity in this packet is one that you can do either after our session today or just at home when you want to, either tomorrow or another day. And for a lot of, especially ancient Near Eastern names and the ancient Egyptian names, there's a lot of meaning involved in your name. And so we're going to look at the meaning of our names by using this site with this origin of my name sheet. We'll put the link, we'll send out the link, but it's called, you go to this website called behindthename.com. And as an exercise, what you do with the worksheet is you can write your name, write your first version of your name, and then you can look up using this behind the name. Oops, it won't let me go to back. There we go. Behind the name website, you type in your name. So let's say this is the name of the day. We're going to use this as an example down at the bottom here. So we have Benjamin. So if you were to type in Benjamin, this is the explanation that you would get for this name. So Benjamin means son of the south or son of the right hand. And in this case, there's multiple parts to his name. So you have Ben and you have Yamin. So that's where on this worksheet, you can write each element of your name. So if you have multiple elements of your name, you can break it down. And that helps you get to more about the meaning of your name. And especially, we can see that with Benjamin here, son of the right hand, by breaking down Ben and Yamin. And with that, then, just for fun, we can go back and try and write or draw out a cartouche of what the meaning of your name, what you think of, or how you would write out your name if you had only images. If you couldn't write the physical letters, how would you describe your name? That sound good? And then another thing that we can look at for next time, especially because we're going to look at more objects next time. You see all these objects at the bottom? We'll come back and talk about this activity more, but I want you to get a look at some of these words ahead of time before we come back together on Thursday. And these are some different words that you're going to see a lot sometimes. Some are more specific, like Min is a personal name of a god. So sometimes you'll only see that on objects relating to the god Min. Or Rhea is a name of a person that we have a stela for in our galleries at the OI. But a lot of these other terms are ones that you're going to find a lot if you go to any Egyptian collection. It doesn't have to just be at our museum, but if you go to the Field Museum or you go somewhere else that has a really great Egyptian collection, you'll see these signs over and over again. And if you practice them, you'll be able to be like, oh, I know what that means. I can read that word and impress all your friends and family. That'll be really exciting. But yeah, so we'll come back on Thursday and make sure you hold on to your hieroglyph alphabet sheets so that you can bring those back with you next time. And also this finding key for hieroglyphs if you want to do that activity as well. Hold on to those. We'll talk about them more on Thursday.
For over 100 years, the OI has been a leading research center for the study of ancient Middle Eastern civilizations. Join us in uncovering the past and learn about the beginnings of our lives as humans together. Become a member by visiting oi.uchicago.edu/member.